Imagine you could take, like, the exact same ruthless mathematical formulas that engineers use to keep a 100-story skyscraper from collapsing in a hurricane.
Right.
And you apply them directly to your own soul. No fluff, no vague good vibes or affirmations. Just raw, uncompromising structural engineering applied to human guilt, ego, and failure.
It is a staggering premise we are looking at in our sources today.
It really is.
We are essentially taking ISO 15288, which is the international standard for systems lifecycle processes,
Okay.
and we're combining it with ISO 9001, which governs rigorous quality management, and we are mapping those industrial standards onto the human interior life.
Which is wild.
It strips away all that emotional ambiguity you usually get in traditional self-help, and it replaces it with the cold, reliable mechanics of physics.
Yeah. And to you listening, let me just set the stakes here before we really get going. Because if you have ever felt, trapped in a loop, like maybe aggressively defending your ego in an argument, or dealing with this guilt that you just can't seem to shake, or just feeling like the standard spiritual or psychological advice out there just isn't structurally sound enough to hold the weight of your actual messy life, well, this is the blueprint.
Yes.
So today on this deep dive, we are exploring a framework called the Way of the Logos.
The way of the logos, yeah.
It's this systems isomorphism framework, and basically takes ancient Catholic wisdom and welds it directly to modern behavioral mechanics to completely re-engineer how a human being operates under stress.
And the contrast we're analyzing today is pretty stark. The framework identifies our baseline modern condition as living in this state of what it calls spectral static.
Spectral static.
Right, and also inside digital cages.
Yeah.
So spectral static is the chaotic, draining noise of a fragile ego that's just constantly trying to defend itself.
So exhausting.
It is. And digital cages represent this brittle, entirely unrealistic perfectionism that we force onto ourselves and everyone around us.
Right.
So the whole mission of this engineering framework is to move a person out of that brittleness and into a state of damped resonance and spiritual ductility.
Okay, I really want to focus on that word ductility.
Right.
Because that's a pure engineering term, right?
It absolutely is.
When we talk about a material being ductile, we mean like it has the ability to undergo significant physical stress and deform without actually breaking.
Yes.
Like a copper wire, you can bend a copper wire back and forth and it holds together, it flexes.
Exactly.
Whereas glass has zero ductility. You hit a pane of glass with a hammer and it just shatters into a million pieces.
And according to the engineering metrics of this framework, most of us are walking around like glass.
Wow.
We are incredibly brittle. We've built these identities that are perfectly rigid. And in physics, absolute rigidity is a fatal flaw.
Because it can't bend.
Right.
Sure.
Anything that cannot bend will eventually experience a kinetic force that's greater than its tensile strength.
Makes sense.
And when that happens to a human being, the framework calls it the wall.
The wall. So the diagnosis basically begins with this collision. And I'm thinking about how the sources define the wall. It isn't just like a bad day at the office.
No, not at all.
It is the exact moment your ego collides with reality and completely shatters. It's the absolute limit of your own human effort. You just run out of runway entirely.
And every single person hits one eventually. It could be a really public professional failure,
Yeah.
or a sudden devastating health diagnosis,
Right.
or a financial collapse, or the implosion of a marriage. But what is critical here is the cognitive shift the framework demands regarding this event.
Because our instinct is to hate it, right?
Exactly. Our biological and emotional instinct is to view that shattering as a cosmic punishment or just really terrible luck. We sit there and ask, why is this happening to me?
But the engineering perspective says it actually has nothing to do with luck.
Nothing at all.
It is just reality asserting itself. Like if I build a bridge out of balsa wood and then I try to drive a freight train over it.
It's going to collapse.
Right. And the bridge collapsing isn't the universe punishing me. It's just gravity and mass doing what they do. The bridge was structurally unsound.
That is the precise diagnosis here. Your ego had constructed a version of the world and a version of yourself that was completely out of phase with reality.
Off face, yeah.
So the physics of the universe finally just caught up to your construction. The wall is a neutral event. It is just the kinetic impact of truth.
But see, I'm trying to bridge the gap here between a physical bridge collapsing and a human life collapsing. Because a bridge doesn't feel pain.
True.
When a person's life falls apart, it feels like a physical death. I mean, this psychological pain is agonizing. So if it's just reality asserting itself, why does it hurt us so deeply?
Well, because we rarely walk through life as our true fundamental selves. To survive the daily friction of the world, the human ego constructs this heavy, rigid armor.
Okay.
And the framework refers to this armor as the uniform.
A uniform.
Right. We put on a uniform made of our job titles, our technical expertise, our perceived moral virtues, or even just our social status.
And we wear it to hide what the sources call deep shame. This really clicked for me when I thought about a highly relatable scenario. Not even the extreme ones, just everyday life. Like, take a stay-at-home parent.
Okay, great example.
They might construct a uniform of the perfect, always-in-control parent. And their entire structural identity is built on their children being perfectly behaved in public, eating organic food, hitting all their milestones early.
Right.
That is their uniform.
And that uniform is constructed specifically to cover up a deep shame. Maybe it's a deep-seated fear of inadequacy.
Yeah.
Or a terror of being judged by their own parents.
Oh, absolutely.
So the uniform becomes what the framework calls a false self. The individual experiences an inversion of reality.
Meaning what? Exactly.
Meaning they no longer perceive their worth as an inherent reality. They perceive their worth entirely through the successful maintenance of that perfect parent role.
Wow. Okay, so when they are at the grocery store and their toddler throws an absolute screaming meltdown in the checkout aisle, like knocking over a display of candy,
Right.
the parent doesn't just think, oh, my kid is having a hard time. The parent's nervous system registers an actual structural failure. The uniform is cracking.
Exactly. The kinetic force of the child's meltdown is literally striking the rigid glass of the uniform.
Wow.
And the engineering problem with any uniform, whether it is the perfect parent or the brilliant CEO or the flawless expert,
Right.
is that it is inherently rigid. A uniform is an artificial construct. It can't organically grow. It can't heal from an injury.
It can only be patched.
Exactly. It can only be endlessly patched, polished, or aggressively defended.
Which explains the immediate reaction. When that toddler is screaming, the parent's ego goes into overdrive to patch the uniform.
Yes.
They might start loudly explaining to the cashier, oh, he skipped his nap today, he's never usually like this. Or they might even become overly aggressive with the child just to prove to the onlookers that they're in control.
Because they're terrified of being exposed.
They are scrambling to hold it together.
And the framework calls this reactionary patching process JDE. It stands for justifying, arguing, defending, and explaining.
JDE.
Okay,
Yeah.
Whenever you feel an overwhelming compulsion to JDE, you are leaking energy. You are generating that spectral static we talked about.
Because you're desperately trying to hold a shattered false self together.
Exactly. So the alternative the framework proposes is a concept called kenosis.
Which is a Greek term, right?
Right. It's pulled from ancient texts, and it specifically means self-emptying.
Okay.
But applied here as a behavioral mechanic, it means voluntarily dismantling the uniform. To survive the wall, you basically have to take the armor off yourself before it crushes you.
Because the armor is what's actually hurting you.
Yes. And the sources outline a very specific tactical drill for this, called the so what drill. It's the mechanism for achieving kenosis in real time under extreme stress.
Let's apply this to a professional setting, because the sources detail a really visceral example of this. So let's say I'm a mid-level manager, and I'm wearing my infallible expert uniform. I am giving a high-stakes presentation to the executive board.
High pressure.
Very high pressure. I'm already stressed, I haven't slept, and right in the middle of a crucial slide, my voice cracks loudly. I clear my throat, I get flustered, and I accidentally cite the wrong financial data point.
Okay.
And an executive stops me and calls out the error in front of everyone in the room.
So that is acute, localized stress on the uniform.
Yeah.
The structural integrity is threatened.
Right. My biological reflex is to JJE immediately. I want to say, oh, apologies, I've had a terrible cold all week. My throat is raw.
Explaining.
Yes. And then I want to say, well, my assistant actually compiled this specific slide, so let me double check his work.
Defending and justifying.
Exactly. I'm throwing my assistant under the bus and blaming a virus just to keep my expert mask intact.
Because you are attempting to deflect the kinetic force. But the kenosis response requires you to absorb the force without any resistance.
I absorb it by letting the voice crack just be what it is. I accept the data point correction without a single excuse.
Yes.
When the executive points out the error, the framework says I need to use a 3-second tactical pause. Just 3 seconds of silence to let the ego's panic wave pass.
Let the static die down.
Right. And then I say, you are correct. That figure is inaccurate. Thank you for catching that.
Yes, up.
Full stop. No justification. I am applying the so what drill internally. Like, my ego screams, what if they think I'm incompetent? And the kenosis answer is, so what? Let them.
It is the ultimate removal of friction. Because by refusing to defend the mask, you completely neutralize the attack.
I have to pause and challenge this, though.
Okay.
Because structurally, I understand the physics of it, but practically, let's say I actually do that. I just let the board think, I don't know my own data. Don't I risk losing my job? Well, I mean, aren't these professional roles, these uniforms, aren't they socially necessary for functioning in society? If I abandon the expert uniform, how do I command any respect?
This is a really vital distinction the framework makes. It distinguishes between performing a duty and attaching your ontological survival to that duty.
Okay, break that down.
The way of the logos does not suggest you perform poorly or ignore facts. You must know your data. You absolutely must strive for excellence.
Right.
The structural failure only occurs when the role becomes your identity.
Okay, I think I see the nuance there. If the role is just a duty I perform, then making a mistake means I just need to correct the data. It's just a localized error.
Exactly. It's just a data error.
Yeah.
But if the role is your identity, if you literally are the uniform, then a mistake in the data is processed by your amygdala as an existential threat.
It feels like I'm being destroyed.
Yes, that is the brittleness. When you practice kenosis, you empty yourself of that desperate need for the title to validate your existence.
Wow.
And paradoxically, letting go of defense makes you a far better professional.
How?
Because you can admit a mistake instantly, without all that defensive static that annoys executives and destroys trust. You have nothing left to protect, which makes you incredibly resilient. You achieve that spiritual ductility.
So the stress deforms me, like I might feel embarrassed for a moment, but it doesn't break me because I'm no longer rigid.
Right.
It really is like a psychological martial art. You're taking the momentum of the humiliation, stepping out of the way and letting it crash into the wall instead of into your ego.
Exactly. But we do have to look at the immediate aftermath of this maneuver. Because once you take the uniform off, once you stop jading,
You are left completely exposed.
you are naked.
Yeah, the sources describe this as a really high-tension state. Your brain is just screaming at you to put the armor back on.
Yes.
And if we rush to fix this uncomfortable, exposed feeling, we cause a massive systemic failure. This transition into a vulnerable state requires understanding the actual physics of the soul.
Because when the ego is stripped of its defenses, its immediate biological reflex is to seek a quick fix to escape that discomfort.
Oh, I see this all the time. Someone's life falls apart. Their business fails, their uniform shatters.
Yeah.
And 2 weeks later, they have completely reinvented themselves as this rigid, fundamentalist guru on social media, preaching a new lifestyle. They just swapped one rigid structure for a totally different one, just to avoid feeling the pain of the failure.
And to prevent that exact trap of impatience, the framework introduces the mechanical concept of hupomone.
Which is another Greek term, meaning quiet endurance.
Right. And in the context of systems engineering, the framework translates this as strategic latency.
Strategic latency.
It is the intentional, disciplined practice of remaining under the weight of the truth, without attempting to alter it, run from it, or fix it immediately.
I am thinking about this through a biological lens, actually,
Yeah.
like a physical healing process.
Okay, yeah.
If I go to the gym and I lift heavy weights, I am actually creating micro tears in my muscle fibers.
Yep.
I am causing localized structural damage to my body. But the muscle doesn't grow while I'm lifting. The growth, the strengthening, only happens during the refractory period, the rest days.
Exactly.
If I refuse to implement latency and I just keep lifting heavy every single day because I'm so impatient for results, I don't get stronger. I tear a ligament and I destroy the system.
That is an exact biological isomorphism of what is happening in the interior life.
Wow.
Hupomone is the mandatory refractory period for the soul. It's the time required for the heart to soften and reknit beneath the surface.
So you can't rush it.
You cannot rush it. If you rush to patch the psychological pain with a new uniform or a quick distraction, you trap the systemic infection inside.
Oh.
The framework emphasizes that the profound changes in human consciousness happen in the silence between the notes. If you play a continuous wall of sound with zero latency, you just have chaotic noise.
We really need to pause on this for a second because the weight of this is heavy.
It is.
Strategic latency means sitting in your kitchen, realizing you have deeply messed up a relationship or failed at a major goal, and choosing not to immediately text the person.
Right.
Choosing not to immediately start a new project. Not to numb it with a drink or scrolling on your phone. Just sitting there, bearing the full crushing weight of the reality that you are broken,
Yes.
that requires immense courage.
Is agonizing.
Yeah.
Which is exactly why the framework provides a mathematical constant to help the practitioner endure it. And this brings us to the core physics engine of the way of the logos,
Okay.
the law of dynamic dissipation.
This is where the structural engineering metaphor gets incredibly precise. Let's talk about absolute symmetry.
So in physics, if a structure possesses absolute symmetry, meaning zero entropy, 100% mathematical perfection,
Right.
is completely brittle. An airplane wing cannot be perfectly rigid. It has to be designed to flex dramatically in turbulence.
Or it snaps.
Exactly. A skyscraper is engineered to sway several feet in high winds. If engineers build them to be completely unyielding, the kinetic energy of the wind has nowhere to dissipate, and the structure snaps.
The building has to yield to survive.
Yeah.
And the framework maps this directly onto human perfectionism. It identifies the necessary flexibility, the yielding point in the soul, as the plus 0.048% phi variance.
Yes.
And they call this intentional imperfection the Dert, D-E-R-T.
The Dert is the realization that the divine order, the logos, is not found in sterile, flawless perfection. It's found in what the framework calls sincere friction.
Sincere friction, I love that term. It's the dog hair on the rug 5 minutes after you vacuum.
Yes, exactly.
It's the annoying, petty argument with your spouse over who forgot to run the dishwasher. It is the reality that your life will always have a slight margin of messy humanity.
And if you attempt to aggressively eliminate all dirt from your life, like if you try to force your children to never make a single mistake,
Right.
or your house to remain in a state of absolute sterility, or your career trajectory to be a flawless upward curve, you are constructing a digital cage. You are eliminating the variance necessary for a living system to actually function.
A digital cage. Think about auto-tune in modern music production.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
This is the perfect analogy for the Dert. If you take a human vocal recording and you map it onto a computer grid and you pitch correct every single syllable to 100% mathematical perfection with zero variance.
It sounds awful.
It sounds like a robot. It sounds dead. It is actually grating to the human ear. What gives a vocal performance its soul, what gives you goosebumps when you hear it, is the slight human variance.
Right.
It is the breath, the microscopic hesitation, the note that is fractionally flat before sliding smoothly into pitch. That human variance creates acoustic resonance. That variance is the Dert.
And the framework argues that the soul operates on the exact same acoustic principles. The Dert is what keeps the human system open to grace and connection with others.
Because perfect people can't connect.
Exactly. Perfect people cannot connect with anyone. They can only judge. The intentional admission of imperfection allows the system to breathe.
Okay, so embracing the holy friction of the Dert keeps us from becoming brittle digital cages. But I am seeing a potential loophole here.
Okay, what is it?
If the Dert is the everyday systemic trouble, the friction, what happens when the friction crosses the line from a minor annoyance into an actual injury? Because it's one thing to embrace the Dert of my partner forgetting to buy milk. It's another thing entirely if my partner drains our bank account. How does the physics account for deep damage?
That introduces the necessary counterpart to the Dirk, which is the Derman.
The Derman.
If Dert is the systemic trouble, the friction, or the wound, the Derman is the cure, the restitution. And there's an absolute non-negotiable law in this physics.
Which is?
The Derman must be exactly as deep as the wound.
Meaning the cure has to match the systemic debt mathematically.
Yes.
You cannot apply a shallow cosmetic cure to a deep structural injury.
Precisely. If you cause a massive amount of entropy, say you spread a malicious lie that destroys a colleague's career, you have introduced a massive structural deficit into the reality of that community.
Right.
You cannot balance that ledger by simply sitting in your room, feeling really guilty about it, and deciding to do better next time.
Right. Because my ego tells me, well, I feel terrible, my guilt is my punishment, so we are even.
The framework categorizes that as a dangerously shallow Derman. Applying a shallow cure to a deep debt results in what engineers call a standing wave of spectral static.
A standing wave.
The energy loop never closes. The system remains fundamentally broken, and your guilt will endlessly recur because the underlying physics haven't been resolved.
So the mechanics here are incredibly strict. We
Sure.
have kenosis to shed the uniform. We have strategic latency to endure the exposure. We have the dirt to keep us ductile, and the dermin to cure the actual debts. Now, knowing the physics of this is fascinating, but I really want to know how this highly technical ISO standard approach stacks up against the spiritual and psychological tools people are already using.
Well, the creators of the framework actually conducted a formal systemic audit to answer that exact question.
Which is just so bold.
It is. They took their systems isomorphism approach and graded it against the top 10 established spiritual and psychological frameworks, evaluating them purely on functional utility.
This was honestly the most fascinating part of the source material for me. They literally graded ancient spiritual practices and modern therapy like they were stress testing software.
Yes.
To understand the scores, we really need to walk through the 4 grading metrics. What were the engineers looking for when they audited these systems?
Okay, so metric 1 is forensic clarity.
Meaning?
Does the framework accurately and precisely identify the true root cause of the behavioral failure? Or does it merely manage the symptoms?
Okay, so finding the actual bug in the code.
Exactly. Metric 2 is structural rigidity. Is the logic of the framework hardened against ego manipulation?
Let's talk about that for a second. Ego manipulation. You see this constantly in modern self-help.
Oh, everywhere.
People learn therapy terminology, and then their internal gaslighter, their ego, uses that terminology to defend terrible behavior.
Yes.
A person might ice out their friends and act incredibly selfishly, but they label it setting boundaries or protecting my peace.
Right. The framework they're using lacks structural rigidity. It allowed the ego to hack the system.
Exactly. A sound framework must trap the ego and leave it no escape routes.
Now, metric 3 is horizontal utility.
Horizontal utility.
Does the framework demand real-world physical restitution? Does it force the practitioner to engage with the sincere friction of the physical world, or does it allow them to escape into a purely mental or emotional resolution?
And metric 4.
Systemic completeness. Does the framework contain a protocol for unresolvable system failures? What happens when a physical problem literally cannot be fixed? Does the system break down, or does it have a failsafe?
Okay, so every framework is graded out of 30 possible points. Let's put some heavyweights through this audit.
Right.
To really see how this works, let's create a hypothetical scenario. Let's invent a guy named Dave.
Poor Dave.
Poor Dave. Dave got greedy, lied to his business partner, and cost their small company $50,000.
Okay.
Dave feels terrible. His life is falling apart. He is hitting the wall. Let's run Dave through the frameworks. First up, Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12-step program.
Okay.
This is one of the most successful behavioral modification systems in history. How does it score?
The 12-step program scores an impressive 26 out of 30.
Oh, wow. That's really high.
It is. It excels phenomenally in horizontal utility.
Why? What is the mechanism there?
Well, steps 4, 8, and 9 of the program require a fearless moral inventory, and they mandate that the practitioner make direct physical amends to the people they have harmed.
So it forces action.
Yes. It does not allow Dave to just pray for forgiveness. It forces Dave into reality. He must go to the business partner and attempt to make it right.
So why does it lose 4 points? Why isn't it a perfect 30?
It loses points on forensic clarity and systemic completeness. In AA, Dave would identify his actions as stemming from a character defect, such as greed or selfishness.
Okay, which sounds right.
It sounds right, but the Logos engineers argue this is too broad. It isn't precise enough to fully dismantle the false self. The Logos framework demands Dave map the specific internal gaslighter. Why was Dave greedy? What was the deep shame?
Okay, I see.
Perhaps Dave's uniform was the smartest guy in the room, and a market shift threatened that, so he lied to maintain the mask. Identifying the precise mechanism of the lie is required for a full system flush.
And the systemic completeness issue.
If Dave's business partner refuses to speak to him or vanishes entirely, the 12-step program can sometimes leave the practitioner stuck in a loop. Unable to complete the 9th step of making amends, it lacks a rigorous, mathematically balanced secondary protocol for unreachable debts.
Okay, let's test a heavyweight from the Catholic tradition. The Ignatian exercises developed by St. Ignatius of Loyola.
Yes.
This is a 500-year-old system. It involves deep retreats, intense meditation on the Gospels, and a meticulous process of discerning the movement of spirits, like consolation and desolation. Millions consider it the absolute gold standard for spiritual discernment.
They do.
How does Dave fare here?
The Ignatian exercises score a 23 out of 30.
Wait, really? A 23?
Yes, 23.
I'm going to push back on behalf of a lot of listeners who might be shocked by that.
Yeah.
How does a globally revered spiritual masterclass lose 7 points in an audit?
Because the audit is based on structural engineering, not theological beauty. The Ignatian method is brilliant, absolutely,
Yeah.
but it is heavily, almost exclusively internal. It is profoundly focused on mapping the interior movements of the soul. So from an ISO standard perspective, it lacks sufficient horizontal utility.
It's too much in the head.
Yes. If Dave goes on a 30-day Ignatian retreat, he will achieve an incredibly deep understanding of his desolation and the spiritual forces that led him to lie. He will likely experience profound internal repentance. But the Logos engineers argue that if a system relies entirely on internal discernment, the ego, that internal gaslighter, can eventually manipulate those feelings over time.
Oh, wow. Dave can convince himself that because he feels so at peace after the retreat, the debt is settled, but his business partner is still out $50,000.
Exactly. The Logos framework requires the physical resistance of the external world to prove the internal change is real. You need boots on the ground, physical friction to anchor the software update into the hardware of reality.
That makes a lot of sense. Let's pivot to psychology. Carl Jung and Jungian shadow work.
Okay.
This is incredibly popular right now, integrating the dark, repressed parts of your psyche. Where does Jung score?
Jungian shadow work scores a 17 out of 30.
A 17. A failing grade. Why?
Well, it excels perfectly at forensic clarity. It maps the false self, the uniform, and the shadow with surgical precision.
So Dave would know exactly why he lied.
Yes. Dave would fully understand the deepest, darkest roots of his betrayal. But the system provides no system flush.
Meaning what?
Meaning it gives Dave a highly detailed, perfectly drawn map of his systemic debt. But knowing you have a massive debt does not pay off the debt. Shadow work lacks the functional mechanism to actually clear the entropy from the soul and balance the physical ledger.
Knowing you have a debt doesn't pay it off. That is a brutal assessment of modern therapy.
It's harsh but structurally accurate.
And finally, let's look at what the framework calls standard cheap grace. This is your run-of-the-mill, modern, internet spiritual advice. Just forgive yourself. God loves you exactly as you are. Protect your energy.
According to the strict metrics of the Logos engineers, this standard advice scores a dismal 5 out of 30.
I can see why. If Dave just forgives himself, the $50,000 is still gone.
It is entirely low heat. It ignores the necessity of the Dert and the Derman entirely. It tells Dave he can achieve profound interior peace without removing his uniform, without facing the pain of kenosis, and without balancing the ledger in the real world.
So it's basically useless structurally.
It fails structurally on every single metric. It allows the ego total control.
So how does the way of the Logos achieve its claimed perfect 30 out of 30 score? What does it do that these other systems don't?
The answer lies in how it perfectly balances the internal spiritual flesh with external physical reality.
Okay.
It refuses to let you hide in your mind, but it also doesn't rely entirely on you white-knuckling your behavior. And this brings us to the operational core of the framework.
The dual resolution process.
Yes.
The ultimate objective of this process is achieving a state the sources call acoustic lock. We touched on acoustic resonance earlier with the auto-tune analogy, but let's explain the mechanics of acoustic lock. What is actually happening?
Acoustic lock is an objective, measurable state of resonance between the human system and the divine order, the architect or the Logos.
Okay.
When a system achieves acoustic lock, the spectral static, all that anxiety, the desperate need to JGE, the crushing weight of deep shame, it is entirely neutralized.
Wow.
The internal architecture of the person is vibrating in perfect phase with reality. There is no structural dissonance.
To get to acoustic lock, the framework demands you engage 2 separate axes. Let's start with axis 1, which is vertical resolution. The sources also refer to this as the sacramental axis.
This is where the specific Catholic mechanics of the framework integrate with the physics. The vertical resolution is the apostolic commission. Specifically, it is the act of sacramental confession to a priest who is acting in persona Christi Liber, in the person of Christ.
I want to look at this purely through the engineering lens we've been using, treating this like systemic plumbing.
Yeah.
Because to someone outside the Catholic tradition, stepping into a box and telling a guy your sins might just look like an emotional unburdening.
Right, like therapy.
Exactly. What is the framework saying is mechanically happening in that confessional?
The framework treats sin not merely as a broken rule, but as ontological entropy.
Entropy, like microscopic rust on a load-bearing steel beam. You might not see the rust today, but it is actively degrading the structural capacity of the metal.
Precisely. You can paint over the rust with therapy or cheap grace, but the load-bearing capacity is still compromised.
Right.
From a systems perspective, the vertical axis sandblasts the rust. When the priest pronounces absolution, it provides an objective, external injection of divine forgiveness.
Wow.
It cures the fundamental spectral static that separates the soul from the architect. It flushes the ultimate ontological entropy from the human system and resets the baseline to zero.
But the Logos engineers point out a massive caveat here. Vertical resolution alone isn't enough to change human behavior on the ground.
No, it is not.
If Dave goes to confession, confesses his $50,000 theft, receives absolution, and walks out, if he stops there, he is highly likely to fall right back into the same deceptive patterns. That is the trap of cheap grace slipping into a rigorous system. You know, God forgave me, I'm clean, I don't need to do anything else.
That is exactly why the framework requires the bottom half of the equation to lock the software update into the hardware.
Yeah.
You must engage axis 2, horizontal resolution.
The restorative loop?
Yes.
So if the vertical axis is making peace with the architect, the horizontal axis have to be the boots on the ground cleanup. I'm guessing this means Dave actually has to look the business partner he betrayed in the eye.
He absolutely does. The horizontal resolution is mutual accountability and direct reconciliation with the injured party in the physical world. It is the implementation of proportional penance.
Proportional penance. This ties directly back to the golden rule of the physics we established earlier. The Derman must be exactly as deep as the wound.
Exactly. The vertical resolution healed Dave's relationship with the ultimate order of the universe,
Yeah.
but it did absolutely nothing to heal the trauma in his business partner's nervous system.
Or replace the stolen funds.
Right. The horizontal resolution requires Dave to face the sincere friction of the physical world. He must approach the partner without his uniform, refusing to JD away. Admit the theft with forensic clarity and make a real-world restitution of the $50,000.
Let's synthesize this. What happens when axis 1 meets axis 2?
When vertical, the divine absolution, perfectly aligns with horizontal, the real-world restitution, the system achieves the acoustic lock.
The books are balanced.
The internal reality and the external reality are synchronized. The cure is now mathematically as deep as the wound.
And that structural change prevents the repetition of the failure. Dave isn't just trying really hard not to lie anymore.
Right.
The brittle architecture of his ego that produced the lie in the first place has been entirely dismantled and replaced with ductile material. It's a closed energy loop. It sounds mathematically flawless, but reality is messy.
Yes, it is.
This is where the framework truly earns its 30 out of 30 score by addressing the ultimate stress test. It is incredibly easy on paper to say, well, Dave, just go apologize and give the money back.
Sure.
What happens if the horizontal axis is physically blocked?
This is precisely where almost every other spiritual and psychological framework breaks down, or just offers platitudes.
Let's alter Dave's scenario to explore this system failure. Let's say Dave stole the $50,000 20 years ago. It caused a massive, ugly rift.
Okay.
Fast forward to today. Dave hits the wall. His life collapses. He discovers the way of the Logos framework. He sheds his uniform through kenosis. He goes to confession, so vertical resolution is achieved.
Yes.
He gathers the courage and the funds to face the sincere friction. He is ready to execute the horizontal resolution, but he discovers his former business partner passed away last year. Or, alternatively, the partner is alive, but has a strict restraining order against Dave and has made it crystal clear they will never ever communicate with him again.
This represents a total physical blockade of the restorative loop.
So what does the framework say happens to Dave? Is he just doomed to walk around with this unresolved entropy forever? Does the system fail?
In the physics of the soul, an unpayable debt of this magnitude creates what engineers call a standing wave of spectral static.
A standing wave. Imagine dropping a heavy rock into a small, enclosed pool of water. The ripple travels outward, hits the concrete wall, and bounces back.
Right.
It just keeps bouncing back and forth across the surface, never dissipating.
That is the exact dynamic. The loop cannot close.
Yeah.
The massive entropy Dave introduced into the world hasn't been neutralized by a proportional force of order.
So he's carrying it.
He is still holding on to energetic debt that doesn't belong to him. And the framework warns that if left unaddressed, This standing wave will eventually fracture his newly restored ductility. The constant internal pressure will make him brittle again.
So how does the Way of the Logos engineer a solution for an unreachable debt?
It introduces a protocol engineered specifically for this system fail. It is called the secondary harmonic or proxy resolution.
Proxy resolution.
The functional rule is this. If you are physically barred from making restitution to the individual cell, you must make proportional restitution to the larger body that cell belonged to.
The body. This is incredibly tactical. Let's walk through the steps of this proxy resolution because it leaves absolutely zero room for the ego to hide.
Right.
Step 1, the calculation of the ledger.
Dave does not get to just guess what he owes or throw a few dollars in a charity bin and call it even. He must mathematically calculate the true dirt. The framework demands strict proportionality.
Right, because $50,000 20 years ago is not the same as $50,000 today. Inflation alone changes the math.
Exactly. And beyond inflation, Dave must account for the temporal lag and the profound emotional distress he caused over 2 decades.
Oh, wow.
The framework mandates the calculation of a mercy tax. Dave must arrive at a sum that actually causes significant physical or financial friction to his current lifestyle.
Because if the restitution doesn't hurt, the Derman isn't deep enough. It has to cost him something tangible, or the ego won't register the energy transfer.
Exactly. So let us say, after calculating inflation and the mercy tax, the true ledger demands $100,000.
Okay, Dave calculates the true cost. Step 2, proxy restitution. Where does Dave put $100,000 if the partner is dead or refuses contact?
Dave must inject an equal force of order back into the world to balance the specific entropy he caused. If the partner is deceased, Dave funds their legacy. He quietly sets up a business scholarship in the partner's name, or he donates to a specific cause the partner championed.
And if the partner is alive but refuses to speak to Dave because the theft destroyed their family's security,
then Dave anonymously donates that money to a family support charity, like a local shelter or a housing initiative.
I see.
Dave is essentially using his capital to signal the universe, I introduced a massive force of entropy into the concept of family security. I am now injecting an equal, proportional force of order back into the concept of family security.
That is profound. He is balancing the universal ledger on a macro level because the micro level is blocked.
Yes.
But there is a third step to this proxy resolution, and honestly, this is where the psychological genius of this framework hits hardest. Step 3, the penance of silence.
This is unequivocally the most difficult step for the human ego to endure.
I can absolutely see why. Let's slow down and really think about this. When we hurt someone deeply and we finally realize it, we feel an overwhelming wave of guilt.
Naturally.
What does the ego really want in that moment? It wants to force an apology. It wants to corner the person we hurt, dump all of our heavy guilt onto their lap and hear them say, "It's okay, I forgive you."
Right.
We crave the apology not for their healing, but so we can feel better. It's actually a deeply selfish act masquerading as humility.
That is an incredibly accurate forensic analysis of the ego. If someone has set a firm boundary, if they have explicitly stated they do not want to speak to you, forcing your emotional confession onto them is not horizontal resolution.
It's the opposite.
It is a violation. It is a further injury. You are breaking their boundary to soothe your own internal static.
So what is the alternative for Dave?
The penance of silence. The framework calls this the invisible Derman. The penance is carrying the agonizing weight of being permanently misunderstood.
Oh, man.
Dave must execute the proxy restitution completely anonymously. He feels the intense financial pinch of giving away that $100,000, and he must live with the acoustic lock of knowing that the books are balanced in the eyes of the architect, even if he never gets a thank you.
Even if he never gets the emotional release of a hug, even if that former partner goes to their grave genuinely believing that Dave is still a selfish, greedy villain.
Bearing the weight of the shadow without defending yourself, that is the ultimate execution of kenosis. That is ultimate self-emptying.
You are letting your reputation remain ruined in their eyes because you recognize that protecting their peace and their boundaries is infinitely more important than your need for vindication. That takes my breath away. It is so counter to everything our modern culture tells us about speaking our truth or clearing the air.
But from a structural engineering standpoint, it is the only way to ensure the system is completely closed without causing secondary damage. The standing wave of spectral static is dissipated into the proxy action. The entropy is neutralized. The practitioner achieves zero entropy. They are fully ductile.
We have covered a massive, heavy amount of ground today. Let's try to bring this all together for everyone listening.
Sounds good.
We started by diagnosing the brittle, false self, the uniform we construct to hide our deep shame and shield ourselves from the friction of reality.
We examine the inevitable kinetic collision with the wall, and we explore the absolute necessity of kenosis, that voluntary self-emptying that stops our ego from JE and leaking energy.
We embraced the actual physics of the soul. We learned that the plus 0.048% variance, the dirt, the sincere, annoying friction of daily life, is actually the necessary thermal expansion joint that keeps us from shattering. We walked through the dual resolution process, realizing that we need both the vertical sacramental flush of entropy and the horizontal boots-on-the-ground restitution to achieve true acoustic lock.
And finally, we stress-tested the framework through the proxy resolution, learning how to balance the ledger for unreachable debts by bearing the profound, invisible Derman of silence.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, why does all of this matter to you? What is the ultimate takeaway? Remind yourself of the goal. Spiritual ductility.
Yes.
The aim of your life is not to build an impenetrable, perfectly rigid fortress of a reputation that will inevitably shatter under the weight of reality.
It will shatter.
The goal is to become a resilient vessel, one that can absorb the shocks, the grief, the failures, and the messy, beautiful friction of human existence without losing your fundamental resonance. We don't break because we can't fix the past. We reshape ourselves to serve the future.
To connect this entirely to the bigger picture, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. If the universe truly operates as a resonant acoustic symphony, and if God's omnipresence is not just a static fact, but the very silence and the perfect proportion between the notes, are you spending your life trying to rigidly control the music to avoid the dissonant chords? Or are you finally ready to unbuckle your armor, step into the gap, and let the friction tune you to the logos?
That is the defining question. The music is playing whether we like it or not. It's time to take off the uniform. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.